Hello readers! Before I jump into my October wrap-up, I do want to say that the Libri Library Book Club is reading Mort by Terry Pratchett for the month of November. It is the fourth book in the Discworld series, but from what I understand, it's one of the better ones, and it's Through the Eyes of Death. Please feel free to join the Libri Library Book Club on Goodreads, and the link for that will be in the description below. In a very surprising turn of events, I somehow managed to read 10 books this month. The first one, which was also the Libri Library Book Club for the month of September, is Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleeton. We already did our live discussion for this, so I will link to it in the description below. Next Year in Havana was a book that I heard about online and I immediately pre-ordered. And I purchased this copy on Amazon. It is Chanel Cleeton's historical fiction debut. The story is told in dual perspectives, the first perspective being from Elisa Perez, who was the daughter of a sugar baron in Cuba, and her family was exiled and they ended up leaving prior to Fidel Castro taking power. The second perspective is of Elisa's Cuban-American granddaughter, and she has been tasked with doing something with her grandmother's ashes after she passed away, and so she goes to Cuba to figure out where in Cuba would be the best place to sprinkle her ashes. There are two romances happening in this story, but I feel like they fell somewhat flat. It seemed like the love interests in this book were really used to fill in all the details about what was happening in Cuba politically. As a Cuban American myself, I enjoyed this story and I feel like I learned a lot. It was obviously very well researched. There was a very specific phrase in this book that kept coming up over and over and over again, and I'm not going to bother mentioning it because maybe if I don't say it, you won't notice it right away. However, someone else in our book club pointed it out, and then afterwards, every time we heard it, it was kind of annoying. The author is Cuban American, which is great, although I was a little disappointed to find out that she had never actually visited Cuba. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars, and while I really appreciate what the author was trying to accomplish, the writing just felt a little bit weak to me. And to provide some further examples of what I mean by weak, repeating the same phrases over and over again, the secondary characters just felt very one-dimensional. I'm not going to say too much more, only because we did do an hour-long discussion about it, so if you've read it, you can go check that out. The second book I read was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This is a young adult historical fiction novel, and it's narrated by Death, as he follows a young girl named Liesel. She develops this quirky habit of stealing books, and Death follows her story as her adoptive family then go to protect a Jewish man, and all this is taking place during World War II. This book was sent to me by Bookworm Becca for Book Swapathon, which I didn't even get a chance to participate in, but thank you, Becca, for the book. In addition to reading the paperback, I also listened to the audiobook. In the beginning, it was a little bit difficult for me to follow along. I wasn't sure I was really understanding why the story was being told by Death. I thought that was a little quirky and strange, so it takes a little bit of time to get used to. Eventually, I found myself growing very attached to all of the characters and their individual struggles. I feel like I've been reading a lot of World War II historical fiction, and part of it is kind of by accident. I keep finding myself asking the same question after I'm done with the books, which is, would I risk my life to help another human being under those circumstances? And I don't really have an answer. I don't think anyone ever knows until they're put in that position. I'd like to say that the answer is yes, but it's scary. It's such a scary time. I hate that that even happened. Death as the narrator is the outsider looking in, trying to figure out humans and trying to figure out like why we caused this war and we hurt each other and we do all these terrible things. But then he also sees the flip side of it. He sees people helping the Jews, and he sees how we hold on to hope and how we struggle and fight and persevere through the terrible things that we put us through. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and there was one part in particular where I was listening to and about to have lunch with my husband, and all of a sudden I just started crying because I was just so impacted by the situation and the fight and the hope that remained in these people. The third book I read is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica L. Sanchez, which is a debut young adult contemporary fiction Mexican-owned voices book. I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter is a book that I bought on sale as an ebook first, and then kind of forgot that I had bought it on sale, and I later went to Barnes & Noble and I ended up seeing it and I picked it up. So I do have it in more than one format, but in addition to having it in two formats, I did listen to the audiobook, and I thought the girl that did the narration, who I apologize for not knowing her name, did an excellent job. I borrowed the audiobook from my library using the Overdrive app. In this story, the main character, Julia, has just lost her sister, Olga, and she's struggling to help her family deal with their grief. And right now it's not looking too good for her because her family feels like they lost their perfect daughter. They lost the daughter that stayed home and didn't give them trouble and helped them around the house and, you know, did a lot for the family. And Julia doesn't feel like she can live up to these expectations that they're now placing on her. And she's constantly being compared to her sister. Throughout the book, she starts discovering and uncovering things about her sister that leads her to believe that Olga may not have been as perfect as everyone thought she was. But throughout the book, Julia is trying to discover herself. She's trying to deal with her anger. She's trying to deal with all the pressure that her family is putting on her. And she uses writing as a way to cope with that. I should probably throw in a content warning for depression and attempted suicide. I really enjoyed this book, and while I'm not Mexican myself, I do relate to the similarities in Latino culture where we are very family oriented, where they are very strict and they have certain expectations of you. I think what the book captures really well is how immigrants come to the United States and they want a better life for themselves and for their children, but at the same time they want to retain their culture and they feel like their children are being somewhat influenced by American culture and not in a good way. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm happy to be chipping away at my Latinx authors reading list. The fourth book I read is a children's picture book that I received from NetGalley, and it's called Chili Da Vinci by Jarrett Rutland. Chili Da Vinci is a self-declared inventor penguin who has been unsuccessfully creating these inventions, and in the book he's trying to create a flying machine. Chili Da Vinci here being like Leonardo da Vinci, and I thought it was very cute. It was short, the illustrations were nice, I thought there were some parts that were funny. I would definitely pick this up for... The fifth book I read was The Mermaid by Christina Henry. This is actually the first Christina Henry book I've ever read. It was provided to me by the Penguin First to Read program. Unfortunately, I didn't finish reading it before it expired, so I ended up later getting the audiobook from my library using the Overdrive app. The Mermaid is a historical fairy tale about P.T. Barnum's Fiji mermaid. The book included themes of oppression and othering and sexism, but Amelia the Mermaid was a very feminist mermaid, and she often stood up for herself and against the social norms of the time, and she stood up for other people, and that was one of the things that really helped me get excited about the story. For at least half of the book, I was thinking I was going to give it 3 stars, but by the end, I raised that to 4 stars. There was romance, there was violence. I enjoyed it, and I'll definitely be reading more by Christina Henry. Book number 6 was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. This was a book I had been eyeing for a while, but when my husband saw an interview with Neil on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, we both got excited and we were like, hey, it's a pretty short book, let's go ahead and read it. I borrowed the audiobook from the library using the Overdrive app. What I quickly realized is that Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, it's not equal to Astrophysics for Dummies. I was probably able to process 30% of this book, though I do want to say that Neil does a fantastic job of incorporating humor and simplifying some of the more complex scientific themes. Even so, it was more than my brain could handle. I thought it was a book that I could learn a lot from, but I just don't have enough of a foundation to build off of. Because I realized a lot of this was my problem and not the book's, I still gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The 7th book I read this month wasn't really a book. It was an 8-minute interview that I got from Audible called The Voices of Joe, Carolyn Meets Santino. In it, the author of You, Carolyn Kepnes, is interviewing the narrator of the You audiobook, Santino Fontana, and she's asking him questions in regards to how he felt narrating the book and what his connection to the main character was, and they kind of get to know each other, and it was pretty cool, but it was short. And again, not really a book, but I did get it from Audible, and it was also listed on Goodreads, so I figured I'd add it. The 8th book I read this month was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and this book is somewhat difficult to explain. I don't know if I even want to attempt it. Actually, I think I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you that I absolutely loved this book. It like blew me away. It was a 5 out of 5 stars, and I think I'm gonna make a separate review video for it because I enjoyed it that much. Like, I had such a book hangover after finishing this, and there was so much. And I felt so connected to Laini Taylor because she is clearly a fringe dweller, and it was very clear to me that she lives a super interesting life, and I would love to get inside her head. This book was just so meaningful to me as a lucid dreamer, and I will say more in a full review later on. I guess at the very least I can tell you that it is book 1 in a fantasy duology. Book number 9 was Lifelike by Jay Kristoff. This was read by the Libri Labra Book Club for the month of October. We've already had our book discussion, so I'll go ahead and I will link to it in the description below. This is part 1 of a YA sci-fi series. There was robots, there was a dystopian United States. The main character in this, whose name is Evie, she ends up uncovering a lifelike android which has been banned for quite some time, and throughout the story you get to find out why they've been banned. This was pitched as Romeo and Juliet meets Mad Max Fury Road. This was a book I had in my most anticipated reads for 2018, so the minute I heard about it, I pre-ordered it. I definitely enjoyed it, but I didn't rate it because it wasn't until after the discussion that I started to see the more deeper themes in the book, and I'd really like to give it a reread before I give it my authentic rating. I feel like there's a lot that I missed in this story, pretty much because in addition to reading it in hardback, I was also listening to the audiobook, which I borrowed from the library so that my husband could absorb it. And audiobooks is just not the best way for me to process a story. So I'd like to go back and I'd like to reread this. I did enjoy it though, but I expect to enjoy it a lot more upon reread. And the 10th book I read for the month of October was The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy by Mackenzie Lee. This is the second book in the Montague siblings duology. The first one being The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which I absolutely loved. I gave that one 5 stars, and I also give this one 5 stars. This takes place somewhat where the last one left off, but it follows the main character of Felicity, who is Monty's sister, and she very strongly wants to follow her dream of becoming a doctor, but this takes place in the 1800s, so women are treated very differently back then. So this book kind of covers her struggles and what she goes through and some of her harebrained schemes as far as trying to make that dream of hers come true. But I think along the way she ends up learning a lot about herself and what it means to be a woman. There is asexual representation, and I'm going to throw in a content warning for substance abuse. I pre-ordered and purchased this book on Amazon in addition to also purchasing the book on Audible so that my husband can listen to it with me. I read this with the Once Upon a Read-Along group with the Brunette Bibliophile and also Kat from For the Love of Books and Reading. I'll link to our discussion below. I think the author does an excellent job of maintaining the voice of someone that would be living in the 1800s while still injecting lots of humor and self-awareness, and Felicity definitely does grow from beginning to end. I love what she learned about herself and what she learned about the world, and I just thought it was a great book. Well, that's all I've got. I would absolutely love to hear what you guys read for the month of October. Please let me know in the comments below. If we have similar tastes in books, be sure to subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. If you're already subscribed, then do me the favor of sharing the video so that others can find my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for joining me, and see you next time.